Hi, good morning. Thank you for coming online once again for another live session on financial management. Well, for the last few weeks, we have been covering lots of aspects on markets, right? We did fixed income, foreign exchange, we will be doing derivatives. Now, when you deal with these instruments, one of the main concerns is the risk involved. If I may ask you a question, can you all tell me one instrument which has no risk? No risk at all. Maybe you can type on chat. Treasury bill, very good. Anything else? All right, okay, so treasury bills. Good response, which means if you invest in treasury bills, you take no risk, right? Is that what you mean, Naglish? Okay. Yes, good. You're partly right. Because if you invest in treasury bills compared to investing in, let's say, a fixed deposit or a one-year commercial paper, right? Or even a debenture. Now, when this treasury bill matures, you are guaranteed that you will get your money back, right? So if you invest $100 in a treasury bill, as opposed to investing $100 in a commercial paper or a debenture, the difference is when the treasury bill matures, guaranteed you will get the $100 back, right? But if you invest in a debenture or a commercial paper, there is always a risk that you might not get the investment back. And there can be default. The entity that is borrowing might default. There is no guarantee that they will settle. The reason is treasury bills are issued by the government. So if the government runs short of money, right, any government for that matter, if a government runs short of money, all they have to do is to print money. So every government in the world prints money, except maybe for governments like the central banks like Singapore. And in fact, Singapore does not have a central bank. It's called the Monetary Authority of Singapore. But most central banks do print money. Whereas if a corporate issues a security, a debt security, a corporate is unable to print money. They have not been vested with the authority to print money, unlike governments. So that's the difference between a corporate debt security and a government debt security. Default risk is there in corporate debt. There is no default risk with government debt. Okay, so that's a very good response, Nagulesh. You're right. But the risk is, now if you invest in a treasury bill, right, let's assume that this is 2019. Okay, 2019, last year, if you had invested in a treasury bill, one-year treasury bill, you would have invested at a rate of about 9.5%, 10%, maybe even higher. But 1 year down the line, when the treasury bill matures, right, you will get your money back and you will have to reinvest. So if you're reinvesting in another treasury bill, you will be investing 1 year down the line at about 4.9, even 5%, right? So around that level. Whereas the original investment was going at 10, now you are reinvesting at 5%, half the rate. Right? So that is the risk. It's called reinvestment risk. If you buy treasury bills or treasury bonds, you're exposed to reinvestment risk. Right? Understood? So although treasury bills do not have default risk, they're exposed to reinvestment risk. Okay, so my statement that treasury bills have no risk is not correct. It's not 100% correct. Treasury bills have no default risk. No question about that. But treasury bills are exposed to reinvestment risk. Any instrument for that matter is exposed to reinvestment risk. Not only treasury bills, right? Okay, so going back to my original question, give me an instrument which has no risk at all. By the way, if a government issues its own debt in its own currency, there is no default risk, right? There won't be any default risk. But if a government issues debt in a foreign currency, let's say for example, the Sri Lankan government has issued dollar-denominated debt, right? So if the government runs short of dollars by any chance, they cannot print dollars. In that case, there is always a risk of default. That is called sovereign risk, the risk of a country defaulting. This has happened in the past. Greece has defaulted. Argentina has defaulted. Right? So it's not impossible that governments default on foreign debt, but they will not default on domestic debt. Right. So to go back to my original question, give me one instrument which has no risk, absolutely no risk. Yes. Would anyone like to answer? Well, actually, your silence is there for a reason, because there is no instrument which has no risk. Right? Even the wife is risky. Right? There is nothing which has absolutely no risk. Anything is risky in life. Whatever you do in life, there is risk. Right? Even if you do an exam, there is always a risk. One is the risk of passing or failing. That is one risk. Then, about 20 years down the line, would the exam be valid? Okay, so there are so many risks. Whatever you do, any investment you make, there is always a risk. Right? Coming for classes carries risk. The way you travel carries a risk. Anything you do in life will have a risk. So it's a matter of how you weigh your risk and how you make the best out of a situation, right? Managing your risk and responding in a positive manner, right? So that is risk. Now, how would you define risk? The next question is, how do you define risk? Define risk. What does risk mean to you? Can you type some responses? What is risk? Define risk. Everyone talks about risk, but what is risk? What do you mean by risk? What is your understanding of risk? How do you see risk? Is risk good or is it bad? Very good, Vishnu. Possibility of losing. So is risk good or is it bad? Now, for example, a simple thing like taking an exam, right? You're doing banking, so you're studying for an exam. Okay, Mayuri, what you say, sometimes it's good when risk is high, return is also high. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic point. You're taking an exam. Now, the risk is you can fail, right? But you can also pass, isn't it? So the actual outcome is uncertain. You don't know what is going to happen, because it hasn't happened yet. It will happen only in the future. You still don't know what will happen. So Vishnu thinks risk is bad, but taking a risk is not bad. All right, good. Yes. Yeah, all of you are getting at the right point. Now, if you take a risk, there is always a chance that you will fail, that it might lead to a loss. Okay, so you invest in a company, you might make losses. That is the downside. But you might also make profits, which are also uncertain, but there is an upside also. Right? So you take an exam, you might fail, yes, but you can also pass. Yeah. But the riskiest thing is, if you had not done anything, if you had not taken an exam, then you have there is no possibility of even a pass, right? So the riskiest thing you could do is not to do anything. Right? You have to take a risk and do something in life. Otherwise, it's not going to pay off. Okay, so if you take a risk, the outcome is always uncertain. You don't know whether it's going to be a success or a positive result, or whether it's going to be end up in a negative result. Both outcomes are possible. Out of this, where you will lose is if it is a negative result, if it results in a loss, or you fail an exam, for example, or you make a loss to an investment. That is a negative outcome. Then you will lose. But if you get through the exam, or if you make a profit out of an investment, right, that is a positive outcome. Now, risk is about the downside, about the negative outcome. Right? So it's the downside of something which is uncertain. You don't know the outcome, so it is uncertain. So downside of uncertainty is the risk. And the upside of the uncertainty is the reward. So it's the risk versus reward. Where do you lie in that spectrum? Right? Risk against reward. So where do you lie in that spectrum between the reward and the risk? The downside of uncertainty is called risk. The upside of uncertainty is called the reward. Okay, so I hope that is clear. Now, once you have an understanding of risk, then it is also important that you know how to measure risk. Yeah. So let's move on to the next area on value at risk. Right. All right. So value at risk was first introduced at JP Morgan. Now, this history you need not know, but it's a little bit of history how value at risk began. So this guy at JP Morgan wanted to know a single figure about the risk that he's exposed to, that the portfolio is exposed to. So that is the origin of value at risk. Okay, so you can skip this. You can go through it. It's a little interesting. Okay, so how you measure risk is called value at risk. Let's go through the definition. Value at risk is an attempt to provide a single number summarizing the total risk in a portfolio of financial assets. It has become widely used by corporate treasurers and fund managers as well as by financial institutions. Value at risk states at some probability the expected loss during a specified period of time. Now, that's the most important thing, right? Value at risk is about the maximum possible loss, okay, the maximum possible loss at a given confidence level during a given time period. So you should have two elements in it, right? Two elements. One is the confidence level and also the time period. Without the confidence level and the time period, value at risk makes no sense. Now, for example, let's say you're manufacturing you're in the manufacturing sector, right? And let's assume you're doing ceramics, right? So let's say you're investing. You're an investor and you have been investing for a period of time. Now, these are your returns. Right. So if you plot your returns, These are your returns, I'm sorry. And this is the number of times. So you plot your return against the number of times you make a return. This is the average. Right? It's called a bell curve, where you use the normal distribution. Or the Z-score. Right? The Z-score is something that all of us are familiar with. If you had done your A-levels, most of you would have got Z-scores. Right. So if you make investments, most of the time you will get your average return. Right? Exceptionally, you will get better returns. So these better returns will be on the right side of the graph. But if your returns are bad or less than average, it will be to the left of this graph. Then if you make losses, right? Let's say your break-even level is somewhere here. Beyond this will be the loss region. You make losses beyond that. Right? So these are all losses. Now, if you take the entire area of this graph, entire thing, the bell curve, the total area is 100%. It is 100%. That means the right side has 50% and the left side has another 50%. Right? So your losses are all on the left side. And it worsens as you move to the left. Right? The left tail gives the losses. Now this total area is 50% now. Right? So this is your loss, these are your losses. Okay. Now what value at risk means, the maximum possible loss you will make at a given confidence level over a given period of time. Right? So let's say you want the 95% confidence value at risk, right? So the risk is your loss now, which means you have to look at the left side, right? Value at risk is the loss, you have to look at the left side. The 95% confidence value at risk means now on the right side you have profits, that is 50%. So you need another 45%. Okay, you need another 45% from the left side data. Okay, so you start at the average, come to your left, and this might be where you find the 45%. Okay, so this entire area will give you 45% there. This area is the 45%. That gives you 45% loss. So your 95% confidence, right? At 95% confidence, or you're 95% confident that your maximum loss will be for the next 1 year will be X. Right? Now this is your returns over the period of 1 year. I should have mentioned at the beginning, it's a 1 year returns. You have plotted returns over a period of 1 year. Right? So you are 95% confident that your maximum loss over the next 1 year is going to be X. This is based on historical data. Right? Now, if you have to increase your confidence level, right, from 95%, if you want to go to 99%, from 95, if you want to move to 99, what do you think will happen to the loss? Will the loss increase or will it reduce? Your 99% is to the left or to the right? What do you think? If you understood the concept, what do you think? If you want to find a 99% confidence, right? At 99, if you want to be 99% confident about the maximum possible loss you will make over the next 1 year, what do you think will happen? Will it be more than X or less than X? Or will it be to the left or to the right? 99% confidence will be to the left or to the right. Yes, Vishwa, you're right. Mayuri, also right. So this is 50%, no, 50% your profit, right? Again, you're analyzing your losses, meaning you have to look at the left side. So this is 50%. You want to find your 99%. That means you have to go 49% to your left. Okay, so this is 45. 49 will be another 4% away at this point. It might be Y. Okay, so 99% confident. At 99% confidence, maximum loss for 1 year will be Y. Okay, so for you to specify value at risk, you should have the confidence level as well as the time period. You should have both. Without one of them, it doesn't make sense. Because if you say your value at risk is 100 million, it doesn't make sense. You can't say your value at risk is 100 million, right? Because you have to say at 99% confidence, your 1 year value at risk is 100 million. So you're 99% confident that the maximum loss you will make over the next 1 year is 100 million, right? There is also, you're 99% confident that the maximum loss is 100 million. There is also 1% probability that the maximum loss will be more than 100 million. Right? So 99% of the time, the loss will be within 100 million, but 1% of the time, there is probability that it will go above 100 million. Okay, so that is how value at risk works. Now, if this is 95% confident, if you are 95% confident that over the next 1 year your value at risk is X, there is a 5% probability that the maximum loss over the next 1 year will be more than X. Right? So value at risk states at some probability, right? Often 1% or 5%, this expected loss during a specified time period. Now, in these two situations, we had a 95% confidence and 99% confidence. These are called the confidence levels, right? So there is a 5% which are not confident. That is called the significance. Here it is 1% significance. So if you add confidence plus significance, what should you get? If you had confidence and significance, what should you get? So for example, 5% significance plus 95% confidence gives you 100%. Yes, this gives 100%. Okay. Right. The variable B is the value at risk of the portfolio. It is a function of two parameters, time horizon, and the confidence level. So let's try this example. A 100 million portfolio has a 1.37% value at risk at the 5% probability over 1 week. You're asked to calculate what could be lost and explain what the loss means. Right, so try this example. Right, so 100 million portfolio has 1.37% value at risk at the 5% probability over 1 week. So portfolio size is 100 million, 1.37% value at risk, 5% probability over 1 year. Now this is the diagram, right? The bear curve. The 5% probability is the significance level is 5%. That means confidence level 95%. Okay, so you have 5% of your data here, and this is the 95%. So 95% confidence over 1 week period, you will lose 1.37 of the portfolio, and the portfolio size is 100 million. So you might end up losing 1.37 million. Your value at risk at 95% confidence or 5% significance over the next 1 week is going to be $1.37 million. Right? So that is the answer. $1.37 million. How do you interpret this? You're 95% confident that over the next 1 week period, your maximum loss will be $1.37 million, which also means there is a 5% probability that you will lose more than 1%, 1.37 million over the next 1 week. Right, so 95% of the time you're going to be within $1.37 million loss, but 5% of the time there is a probability of it increasing beyond $1.37 million. Right. So issues with value at risk. Value at risk time period should relate to the nature of the situation. A traditional stock and bond portfolio will likely focus on longer monthly or quarterly value at risk, while a highly leveraged derivatives portfolio might focus on shorter daily value at risk. So there is no one size fits all model. You can't pick a 1 year value at risk across any security you want. It depends on the type of security. If the volatility is high, that means if the price keeps changing more rapidly, then you have to look at a short term. Whereas if the prices are relatively stable, you can look longer term value at risk. The percentage selected will affect value at risk. A 1% value at risk would be expected to show greater risk than 5% value at risk, right? So like we did earlier, our discussions that prevailed earlier, when the significance level is lower, or when the value, when the confidence level is higher, the loss will be greater, right? So greater the confidence level or lower the significance level, higher the value at risk. The left tail should be examined. Left tail refers to traditional probability distribution graph of returns. The left side displays the low or negative returns, which is what value at risk measures at some probability. Right. What are the assumptions that you make when you use value at risk? One is you assume that distributions are normal. Right. The most important assumption you make is that you assume there is a normal distribution, which might not be the case. Then you assume that correlations remain the same among securities. Correlations remain unchanged. And you also assume that history will repeat itself, right? You assume that what happens in the past is a reflection of what will happen or what might happen in the future. Okay, so those are your main assumptions. To calculate VAR, value at risk, there are three methods. First one is the historic. There are three methods: historical, analytical, and Monte Carlo. And so let's start off with the analytical method. The analytical or the variance covariance method is based on the normal distribution and the concept of one-tailed confidence levels, right? So this is the equation that you need to use when you are using analytical value at risk. Right? Analytical value at risk. Value at risk is, you need to memorize this equation. So value at risk is equal to the average return, the expected return on the portfolio, minus the Z score into the standard deviation into the value of the portfolio. Right, so it's R minus sigma Z into V. So this one you need to memorize. You will have to memorize this equation, analytical value at risk. Now this Z means the Z score. Right, Z score. Z scores are standard. Right, when the confidence level or the significance level is 5%. The Z score will be 1.65. And when the significance level is 1%, the Z score will be 2.33. So these figures you need to memorize. 5% significance, Z score 1.65, 1% significance, Z score 2.33. You will have to memorize this. Right. So let's calculate, let's try this example. Value at risk for periods less than 1 year are computed with return and standard deviations expressed for the desired period of time. For monthly value at risk, divide the annual return by 12 and standard deviation by the square root of 12. And then compute monthly value at risk. For value at risk, divide weekly value at risk, divide by 52, and the standard deviation by the root of 52, compute weekly. For very short periods, value at risk can be approximated by ignoring the return component, right? Now, let's try this example and I will explain what that meant. Example is analytical value at risk. The expected annual return for a $100 million portfolio is 6%. Historical standard deviation is 12%. Calculate value at risk at 5% significance. So let's do this. Annual, semi-annual, quarterly, monthly, and daily. Right, so what are your answers? Annual value at risk using the analytical method. Expected annual return. That return is $100 million. Sorry, that's the portfolio size. The return is 6%. And V is 100 million. Standard deviation 12%. Right. So the significance is 5%. That means your Z score should be 1.65, right? So let's calculate annual value at risk. Return 6%. Standard deviation 12%. Z score 1.65 into 100 million. So this is 6% minus 19.8% into 100 million. $13.8 million. Annual value at risk is 13.8 million. How do you interpret? The maximum possible loss at 5% significance or 95% confidence over a one-year period is $13.8 million. In other words, there is a 5% probability that you will lose more than $13.8 million over the next 1 year. That is value at risk. Remember, interpretation is very important. Now, semi-annual. Right. What is your semi-annual value at risk? What is your semi-annual value at risk? And semi-annual will be your return needs to be divided by 2. Right? Because there are 2 semi-annual periods per year. Minus, this is the crucial thing, 12% divided by the square root of 2 into 1.65 into 100 million. Right? So remember, semi-annual is not half of annual. It doesn't work like that. You will get 3% minus 8.49% into 1.65 into 100 million. $11 million negative. Clear? Right, so let's calculate quarterly. Quarterly, so return is 6%, need to be divided by 4 quarters per year minus standard deviation is 12%, divided by the square root of 4 into 1.65 into 100 million. 9.66. Okay. This is 1.5 minus 5. So that's quarterly. Then monthly. You need to divide the return by 12 and the variance by the standard deviation by the square root of 12. Get month. And what about daily? you need to divide by 365. So when you divide 6% by 365, you can even ignore this. It's almost 0. It's minus. It's a negligible value, so you can ignore it. Correct, it should be 5.72. I made a mistake here. It should be 5.72. It's 5.7. So you get these values. Yeah, so I hope that was clear. Now let's do the same calculation. If the Z was 99% at 99% confidence, what will happen if the confidence level was 99%? What would be the change if there was a confidence level of 99%? How would your calculations change if the confidence level was 99%? Now in this one, the confidence level was 95% or significance was 5%. What happens if the confidence level is 99%? And before that, now interpretation of these. Right? So 13.8 million means annual value at risk of 13.8 million means at 5% significance or 95% confidence. In other words, the maximum possible loss over the next 1 year would be $13.8 million. Semi-annual value at risk of $11 million means at 95% confidence, the maximum loss that you expect over the next 1 year will be $11 million. And here, at 95% confidence, the maximum possible loss you expect over the next 1 year would be $8.4 million quarterly. Sorry, next 3 months would be $8.4 million. So this is 6 months at 95% confidence. The maximum possible loss you will expect over the next 6 months would be $11 million. At 95% confidence, the maximum possible loss you will expect over the next quarter will be $8.4 million. Monthly value at risk of 5.2 million means at 95% confidence, the maximum loss you will expect over the next 1 month would be $5.2 million. Right? And daily value at risk of 1.0 means at 95% confidence, the maximum possible loss you will expect over the next 1 day will be $1.04 million. It also means there's a 5% probability that you will lose more. Now, how would this change if the Z score was, sorry, if the confidence level was 99%, what would be the change if the confidence level was 99%? What would change if confidence level was 99%? What would change if the confidence level was 99%? Yeah, the Z score would change. Instead of 95%, it is 1.65. So at 99%, it will become 2.33. That will be the only change, right? All the other calculations will be the same. And what do you think will happen to your value at risk if the confidence level was at 99%? Or the significance was 1%? Z will be 2.33. Then what will happen to value at risk figures? Will they increase or will they reduce? When the confidence level increases or the significance reduces, what happens to value at risk? Will increase. Exactly. Let's try one example and see. When the significance is 1%, your Z score increases to 2.33%. It's 27.96%. And you will end up losing 21.96. Yeah. Right. So it was from 13.8, your loss will jump to 21.9 if your significance level reduces or the confidence level increases. Right. So that can be an MCQ question at the exam. What happens to value at risk when the significant level reduces? The same can be twisted around and asked, what happens to value at risk when the confidence level increases? Right? If everything else remains the same, if confidence level goes up, value at risk would increase. Or if the significance level drops, when everything else remains the same, the value at risk should also increase. Right? So that you should know. Okay. Right. So this was analytical value at risk. Let's move on to the next area. For the previous example, compute weekly value at risk at 1%. So let's do that. At 1% significance, right? 1% significance. Z score becomes 2.33. So let's calculate weekly value at risk. 6% return needs to be divided by weekly's 52 minus 12% divided by the square root of 52. Into 2.33. 3.762. Right. So any questions? Yeah. So that method was called analytical value at risk, or variance covariance method. Right. Advantages of analytical method: it's easy to calculate and easily understood as a single number. Right. It pops a single number, easy to calculate. You have to only substitute your numbers into the equation. It allows modeling the correlation of risks. Right. So for different correlations, you can calculate the value at risk. Can be applied to shorter or longer time periods as relevant. As we just saw, you can do it for various time periods. Disadvantages: it assumes normal distribution of returns. So it assumes there is a normal distribution, which may not be the case. Right. So if there is no normal distribution, analytical value at risk might not work. Then it assumes that many assets exhibit, well, if assets have what is called leptokurtosis, that means a fat tail. Leptokurtosis is something like this. These are the tails. Sometimes tails can be fat. You can have fatter tails. Everything else is the same, but the tail is fat. Fatter tail. Right? So analytical value at risk might not work if you have a fat tail. When a distribution has fat tails, value at risk will tend to underestimate the loss, and it is associated probability, as extreme returns occur more frequently than assumed by the normal distribution. And so if you have fat tails, now what happens is, for analytical value at risk to work, you need to have a normal distribution. Right? But if your distribution has fat tails, it is not a normal distribution. That means there are extreme events concentrated at both ends. Now, if that is the case, analytical value at risk might not work. The difficulty of estimating standard deviation in very large portfolios. Right? So if there are multiple combinations in large portfolios, so let's say you have invested in various types of assets, maybe real estate, equities, bonds, stocks, bonds, derivatives, commodities, currencies. If you have various combinations of assets with multiple links to one another, right? This might be very difficult to implement. Second one is called historical value at risk. Historical method for estimating value at risk is sometimes referred to as historical simulation method. One way to calculate the 5% daily average value at risk using historical method is to assume the number of past daily returns, rank the returns from highest to lowest, and identify the 5% lowest returns. The highest of these lowest 5% returns is the 1 day 5% value at risk. Right? So what it means is this. You have 100 sets of data. Right? If you are plotting returns, you take the returns over the last 100 days and you plot the return on each and every day. Right? So you have a distribution of data, of returns over 100 days. Then you put the returns from the lowest, the worst, to the best. You rank your returns from the worst to the best, right? So if you have 100 items, and you're looking for 5% value at risk, that means the fifth worst return, right? So you go to the worst returns and get the fifth highest. This will be your 5% value at risk. Okay. So you're analyzing historical data from the worst to the best, and then the relevant value at risk position will give you the value at risk. So let's try this example. You have accumulated 100 daily returns for your $100 million portfolio, right? So you have a $100 million portfolio, and on a daily basis, you're tracking returns. So you have analyzed the returns over the last 100 days. After ranking the returns from highest to lowest, you identify the 5 lowest returns. So you have got the 5 lowest returns. You asked to calculate value at risk at 5% significance using the historical method. Your returns are minus 0019, minus 0025, minus 0034, minus 0096, and minus 101. So using these points, how do you calculate your 5% value at risk? First step is to rank the results, right, from the worst. That is the worst. Second is third, fourth, and fifth. Okay, so these are the 5 worst returns. Likewise, you have 100 returns which are better than these. And then the rest of the 95 returns are better than these 5. Now, you have 100 daily returns now, and you asked to calculate the 5% value at risk, right? Which means the fifth worst return. Fifth worst return. So if you had 200 data points, if you had been given 200 data points, you have to calculate 200 into the fifth worst is the 10th worst. So this is the worst, second worst, third worst, fourth worst, and the fifth worst. This is your 5% value at risk. Portfolio size is $100 million into minus 0.0019. That is 190,000 dollars. right? So you rank them from the worst to the best, right? And the fifth worst position is this. So your portfolio size into the return gives you 190,000. Okay, so any questions up to now? Right, so we have done two value at risk methods, historical and analytical. Next one is called Monte Carlo. Advantages of historical method: it's very easy to calculate and understand, right? Very easy. It's even easier than analytical. It does not assume the returns to be normally distributed. You don't have to have a normal distribution to do historical value at risk. Can be applied to different time periods according to the industry and custom. Right? You can use it across any industry you want. The primary disadvantage of historical method is the assumption that the patterns of historical returns will repeat in the future. Right? So you assume that history will continue to repeat itself, that previous returns are indicative of future returns, which is not the case. Monte Carlo is the third method. The Monte Carlo method uses computer software to generate hundreds or thousands of possible outcomes from distributions of inputs specified by the user. Right, so it is a computer-intensive way of doing it. You have to use a lot of IT, lots of software to do this. The user might specify normal distributions from some assets, skewed for others, leptotic for others, and complex shifting correlations over time. Right? So you can have various combinations of assets and the various links amongst the assets. Right? So correlations might be different. You might have various combinations. The runs of possible outcomes can be ranked from highest to lowest, just like historical outcomes, to determine the result at any given probability. Okay, so let's do this example. On Monte Carlo. Right? It says a Monte Carlo model has generated 100 runs of possible outputs over 1 week periods. Right? So over a 1 week period, it has tracked 100 runs on possible outputs. The average return and standard deviation are 5.7 and 2.1% respectively. So you have been given the average return and standard deviation. Right? So if this was given at the exam, you have average return and standard deviation. No sooner you see that, you will think of analytical value at risk. So let's have that in mind, that you have been given the standard deviation and average return. So you can use analytical value at risk if you so wish. The worst 6 outcomes are 0.5%, 1.5%, 1.6%, 0.3%, 0.7%, and 0.5%. The portfolio is known to include extensive option positions. Now, if you have options, the only thing is, if you have options in a portfolio, you might not end up with normal distributions, right? Because options will limit your risk. You are capping your risk at a certain percentage. So options does not give you will not end up with a normal distribution if you're using options, right? Options will limit your losses. The portfolio is known to include extensive option positions, which means it's a hint that you can't use analytical value at risk. You will have to use another method, so Monte Carlo or historical. Calculate 1 week value at risk at 5% significance for a beginning portfolio value of 100 million sterling. Right. So you have 100 possible outcomes, and you asked to calculate 5% value at risk. Right. So 100 into 5% is usually the fifth worst return. Okay, so it's similar to what we did earlier. Six worst outcomes are 0.5, 1.5, 1.6, 0.3, 0.7, 0.5. So you need to rank them from worst to the best. In this case, the worst is the smallest return, since all returns are positive. So worst is 0.3%. Second worst, 0.5%. You also have another 0.5%. Then you will have 0.7%. 1.5%. 1.6%. Fifth worst outcome is, this is the worst outcome, second worst outcome, third, fourth, fifth worst outcome. Right? So it's 1.5% of 100 million sterling, which is 1.5 billion sterling. Right? Your 5% value at risk over the next 1 week, according to Monte Carlo method, is 1.5 million sterling. That is what it means. Okay. So any questions? The primary advantage of Monte Carlo method is also the primary disadvantage. It can incorporate any assumption regarding return patterns, correlation, and other factors the analysts believe are correct. Right? So you can make any number of possible combinations. There is no end to the number of combinations and permutations you can use. So it can be a time-consuming exercise because there are so many ways you can do it. You actually don't know which one is the best to use. That leads to the downside. The output is only as good as input of assumptions. And so the eventual answer is only good as your inputs. Whatever you input only will come as an output. If your inputs are garbage, your output will also be garbage. This complexity can lead to a false sense of overconfidence, right? So you can be overconfident. You might think you have the best possible scenario to analyze risk, which might not be correct. In the output among the less informed, it is data and compute intensive, which can make it costly to use in complex situations, where it may also be the only reasonable method to use. Advantages of value at risk. It has become the industry standard for risk measurement and is required by many regulators. Right? So this is the most sought after method when it comes to measuring market risk, value at risk. Regulators also can insist. It aggregates all risk into one single, easy to understand number. Right? All the risk that is there can be expressed in one single number. It can be used in capital allocation. Like when you need to allocate capital, you can select the projects which end up with the lowest possible value at risk. Limitations of value at risk, as well as having advantages, there can also be limitations. Some of the methods like Monte Carlo are difficult and expensive. Now, to use Monte Carlo, you need to have licensed software, which involves cost, high-tech computers. Then you also need to have trained people, right, so they can think of various combinations. So it's a costly exercise. That itself might be a risk, having to invest in costly equipment and personnel. The different computation methods can generate different estimates of value at risk. So you have different computation methods, and you might end up with different estimates also. It can generate a false sense of security. It is only as good as the inputs and estimation process, right? So you might become overconfident. You might think you have the best possible risk figure, whereas something you totally did not expect, something that you thought will never happen, might actually become your risk situation. So don't be overconfident when you use value at risk, right? Because even amongst value at risk, there are three methods now: analytical, historical, and Monte Carlo. Now, out of these three methods, which one do you use, right? So if you use analytical, it has its own limitations. So you can't use normal distributions, right? Historical also has the limitations. It assumes that historical returns will repeat itself. And Monte Carlo, capital intensive. Now, amongst these, if you pick and choose one method, it does not mean that you have got the best, right? You might be compromising on other factors. So it should never generate a false sense of security. You should still have your eyes and ears open, right? Best way to manage risk is to have common sense. You should know what is going on around you. You should be alert to the situation. It is only as good as the inputs and estimation process. So whatever that goes into the calculation is as good as what you intend to invest in. Even when done correctly, it is probabilistic. Things can always be worse, right? Even if you get the perfect answer, it does not mean you can shut shop and forget about things. No, that doesn't work like that. It is only an estimate, right? So you know how much you can lose. That is one thing, but always have in mind that there is the significance. You are only talking about the confidence level. There is also the significance level, something beyond what you expect. So what you expect will happen 95% or 99% or 98% of the time, but there is always the residual element. Now, what eventually prevails might be the residual element. If you take a long period of time, the residual element might come into play. Now, take for example, if you're analyzing returns over a 100-year period, right? Returns over a 100-year period. So this can include returns that were generated during a pandemic. Okay. Like the Spanish fever, COVID-19. So whatever that happens during the pandemic might happen in that residue. So if you are including a 10-year period, the 2% might include the residual amount. Okay, so you're always talking about probability. Remember, probability is only an estimate. It's a statistical number, and we all have heard that there are three kinds of lies. There are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. Right? So be very careful when you use statistics. On one side, it focuses on the left tail in the return distribution and ignores the upside potential. Right? So you're always looking at only the downside, only the risk, the downside of it. You never look at the upside potential. Right? So if you are basing your investment decision purely on value at risk, you might lose a lot of opportunities which are favorable to you. Right? You're only looking at the downside. You might forget that there is also an upside which is very, very favorable. So you might ignore the upside potential. You might miss out on investment opportunities which are very much favorable. Stress testing, an interesting concept. Now, stress testing is used to assess whether an organization is capable of absorbing shocks. It's the shock absorbing capability of an organization, right? It's called stress testing. Now, this happened during the subprime mortgage crisis, right? Many institutions found it very difficult to service their obligations, and they were stretched to a great extent. Now, interest rates peaked during the subprime mortgage crisis. There were many defaults, lots of uncertainty, right? So, various regulators wanted to make sure that the system is safe for investors, so that there is confidence in the economy, and the economy can move in spite of the risks. That's very important. If there is a risk, it is very important that the economy continues to progress, right? It has to take stock of the risk and still move on with life. Otherwise, it's very difficult to compete. Now, one country, each and every country are competing with the others, right? So if one country stalls, the economy stalls, then the rest of the competitors will take over. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult ball game. Now, therefore, regulators wanted to make sure that the companies in a particular industry, in those industries that they pick, maybe banks, maybe insurance companies, are capable of withstanding shocks. Shocks can be in the form of, maybe, for example, interest rates going be up all of a sudden, or maybe the exchange rate going through the roof, or perhaps there is a spike in NPLs, right? Something like that. So extreme scenarios are your banks or your financial institutions able to withstand a shock like that. That is what is being measured using stress testing. Stress testing may reveal outcomes not reflected in the typical value at risk calculation, right? So value at risk only looks at the confidence level. It does not look at beyond the confidence level, right? The significance level is ignored. For example, the manager might use historical standard deviation in estimating value at risk, and if nothing unusual occurred during the measurement period, the estimated value at risk will only reflect normal circumstances, right? So if you are using historical value at risk, for example, you will only look at that historical period. No, you will not look at anything beyond that. Okay. So let's say 2022. If you are looking only at 1 year's figures, you might forget what happened in 2020. Right. So Corona might be forgotten by then. But the outstanding element, the 1% significance, or the 5% or the 3% significance, might include the risk of COVID-19. Right? It may reveal outcomes not reflected in the typical value at risk calculation. For example, the manager might use historical standard deviation in estimating value at risk, and if nothing unusual occurred during this measurement period, the estimated value at risk will only reflect normal circumstances. Stress testing is just an extreme scenario. So you're pushing factors to extreme cases. Now, this is where your capital comes into play, right? If there is a shock in the economy, NPLs go to, in the industry, let's say, go to 20%. Do you have adequate capital buffers to absorb it? That is what is measured using stress testing. And scenario analysis is used to measure the effect on the portfolio of simultaneous movements on several factors. So you can use scenario analysis. You can check the scenario, like, for example, what will happen if interest rates go up by 5% and the exchange rate goes to 200, a 10% depreciation straight away? So what will happen if NPLs also spike to 15% from the current 5%? In a scenario analysis, the user defines the events such as interest rate movement changes in currencies, interest rate movements, changes in currencies or the exchange rate, changes in volatilities, changes in asset liquidity, and so on. So volatility, these factors might change. Market forces might change. They don't remain static during a crisis. Right? Prices of commodities might go up. Various things can happen. Interest rates might peak. Current exchange rates might go all over the place to extreme levels, maybe to all-time highs or to all-time lows. Then there can be changes in volatility. Right? Uncertainty increases volatility in markets, changes in asset liquidity, and so on. And it compares the value of the portfolio before and after the specified events. Right? So it takes stock of your portfolio before and after the event. Potential weaknesses in any scenario analysis includes the inability to accurately measure byproducts of major factor movements. So now, if you're analyzing scenarios, right, you might look at the exchange rate going to 200 or interest rates spiking by 10% overnight. Now, in such a situation, there might be cross connections between these two scenarios, right? If interest rates spike, perhaps the exchange rate might not go to 200, it might go down. But when you do scenario analysis, you might not be able to take this into account. So that's why it says the inability to accurately measure byproducts of major factor movements. For example, the impact of a major movement in one factor has on other factors, right? So if interest rates go to 50% overnight, all of a sudden, the exchange rate might not go to 200, right? But you don't know what is the byproduct of interest rates going to 15%. You don't know for sure. Then you don't know where the exchange rate is going to be if that happens. Or if the exchange rate goes to 200, you won't know what the interest rate impact is going to be. Right? So cross connections might be missed. It includes effects of simultaneous movements in risk factors. Right? Now, risk factors might move in different directions under different circumstances. It's difficult to analyze how it happens. Forms of scenario analysis. Right. So this is under scenario analysis. So scenario analysis is a way of doing stress testing. Now, under scenario analysis, there are 3 different forms. First one is the stylized scenario. The analyst changes one or more factors to measure the effect on the portfolio. Right. So stylized is you decide which factor to change or 2 factors to change. Rather than having the manager select risk factors, some stylized scenarios are more likely like industry standards, right? So the regulator might come up with stylized scenarios. What happens if interest rates go up to 10%? Stylized scenarios help managers avoid the oh no syndrome. As in, oh no, why didn't we think of that? Right? So sometimes you might get surprised, unpleasantly surprised. And then the underlying factor may have been a very simple thing which you didn't miss through oversight. So stylized scenarios will try and avoid those happening. Actual extreme events, the analyst measures the impact of major past events, such as the market crash of 1987 or the 1990s technology bubble in the portfolio. So you can look at what happened in the past, right? A crisis in the past, maybe subprime mortgage crisis. And during that time, what happened to the factor that you are monitoring? It's called actual extreme events. Then hypothetical events are extreme events that might occur but have not previously occurred. That can happen but has not happened so far. They are called hypothetical events. These tests are subject to same weaknesses as other scenario analysis, example, incorrect assumptions and correlations or user biases. Then stress testing models. Stress testing and stressing models are just an extension of scenario analysis focusing on adverse outcomes. Stressing can be done as factor push, maximum loss optimization, or worst case scenarios. Right? So factor push is a simple stress test where the analyst pushes factors to the most disadvantageous combination of possible circumstances and measures the resulting impact on the portfolio. A factor push is where you stress factors to the worst possible outcomes. Right? Every factor is pushed to the worst possible outcome. Factor push analysis. Maximum loss optimization uses more sophisticated mathematical and computer modeling to find this worst combination of factors. Now, in spite of factor push pushing everything to worst possible outcomes, the actual worst position for you might not be that. It might be different combinations of it. Right? So maximum loss optimization looks at how the maximum loss will be incurred. So it might not be by pushing every factor into the worst case. Worst case scenario is the worst case the analyst thinks is likely to occur. Right? So then in the worst case scenario, the analyst makes a judgment. He will say this is the worst possible thing that can happen. Interest rates will not go to 15%. It will end up at 10%, something like that. Right. So let's try these questions. Question number 1. Consider a portfolio that has the following characteristics: and a return expected of 12%, $1 million portfolio value, annual standard deviation 6%. What is the value at risk of the portfolio at 99% probability level? Okay. So which method do we use? Very straightforward. You can straight away use analytical value at risk. Expected return 12%. 12% return. Standard deviation 6%. Z is 2.33 at 99%. The portfolio value $1 million. The answer should be $1.38 million. Sorry. The answer should be B, $19,800. Right, question number 2. Gregory Chambers is interested in estimating the daily value at risk with 99% probability. Gregory Chambers is interested in estimating the daily value at risk with 99% probability of bank's fixed income portfolio, currently valued at $30 billion. The portfolio has the following returns over the past 200 days, and from high to low. What will be the value at risk estimate using the historical method? Right, so he has value at risk 99% probability, 1% significance, 200 data points. So you need 1% is 200, your 99% value at risk. 1% is the second worst outcome. Okay, so significance is 1%. That means you need to figure out the second worst outcome. So the worst outcome is minus 1.91%. Second one is minus 1.87%. $30 million portfolio. Second worst is this. It's $30 million into 1.87% minus. $561,000 minus. Question number 3. John Dumas is in charge of a $100 million equity portfolio. He expects a return of 10% with a standard deviation of 8%. What will be the minimum value of the portfolio at 95% probability? Let's go from the distribution are at 10% 1.28, 5% 1.65, 2.5% 1.96, 1% is 2.33. So you can straight away use analytical method. This one. Portfolio value is $100 million. Return is 10%. Standard deviation 8%. 95% probabilities is in 1.65. Right, so this is your value at risk, 3.2 million. He's in charge of $100 million equity portfolio, expects a return of 10%, standard deviation 8%. What will be the minimum value of the portfolio? So minimum value, this is $3.2 million is the maximum loss he will incur. Right? So the minimum value of the portfolio will come when the loss is maximum. Minimum portfolio value is 100 million minus the maximum loss of 3.2. So it comes to $96.8 million. Question number 4. If the one-day value at risk of portfolio is 50,000, one-day value at risk is 50,000 at 95% probability. This means that we could expect that one day out of 20 days, the portfolio will decline by 50,000. 20 days, one day out of 20 days, the portfolio will decline by 50,000 or more. One day out of 95 days, the portfolio will lose $50,000. Right? So 95% probability. That means 95% of the time, your maximum loss is going to be 50,000. For 5% of the time, your loss will be more than 50,000. Right? So 5% of the time is one day out of 20 is 5%. Right? 1 out of 20 days, the portfolio will decline by $50,000 or more. Answer is B. 5% of the time, the portfolio will decline by $50,000 or more. Whereas 95% of the time, it will be less than $50,000. Portfolio manager determines that his portfolio has an expected return of $20,000 and standard deviation $45,000, given 95% confidence. What is the portfolio's value at risk? Right, so let's use analytical method once again. Expected return $20,000. Sorry, this is analytical value at risk. If you remove brackets, it's R times B minus sigma times B into Z. Right? So R times B, the return into the value of the portfolio is $20,000 minus standard deviation of $45,000. %95 confidence, this is 1.65 Z score. So value at risk. $74,250. It's $54,250. Answer is C. Last one. Which of the methods for calculating value at risk do asset managers most commonly use? Historical, Monte Carlo, or variance covariance? Answer is most of the time they use historical method. Right? So the historical value at risk is the mostly used. All right, so we have run out of time. I hope everything was clear. Right, so thank you very much. I will see you all next week.